Worthless. The merchant's tentacles rippled with disdain as he tossed Jack Morrison's last possession back at him. The titanium pocket watch, a family heirloom that had survived 3 generations of space travel, clattered across the dingy shop counter. Jack pocketed the watch, his jaw tight. 6 months stranded on Nexus 7, and he'd run out of things to sell. The space station's curved corridors seemed to close in around him, its artificial atmosphere suddenly too thick to breathe. The station's massive observation window caught his eye as he left the shop. Beyond the reinforced glass, the purple-tinged nebula that had disabled his ship's engines still swirled mockingly. The same anomaly that had drawn him here as a freelance mechanic had become his prison. Payments due, human. The gravelly voice belonged to Krax, his Vexillian landlord's enforcer. The brutish alien's exoskeleton clicked as he blocked Jack's path. "I need more time," Jack said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Just 2 more days. Time's up. Administrator Valera wants to see you." Now, Jack had never met the station's administrator. Few had. Rumors painted her as everything from a benevolent reformer to a ruthless tyrant. He'd hoped to avoid finding out which was true. The administrative sector was different from the rest of Nexus 7. Clean. Quiet. The air tasted filtered, not recycled. Krax led him through a series of security checkpoints, each more sophisticated than the last. The administrator's office occupied the station's highest level. One wall was entirely transparent, offering a breathtaking view of the nebula and the endless starfield beyond. But it was the figure standing at the window that captured Jack's attention. Valera turned, and Jack forgot to breathe. Her species was unknown to him. Humanoid, but with iridescent scales that shifted colors like oil on water. Her eyes were silver, pupilless, yet somehow conveyed both intelligence and curiosity. "Jack Morrison," she said, her voice melodic but firm. "The human who claims to fix anything." "Used to fix anything," he corrected, "when I had tools. A workshop. Parts." "Yes, your situation has become problematic." She gestured to a chair. "Please, sit." Jack remained standing. "If you're going to evict me, just do it. But my ship's still in your impound. Where exactly am I supposed to go?" Valera's scales rippled with what might have been amusement. "Eviction? No, Mr. Morrison. I have a proposition for you." She activated a holographic display. Images of machinery appeared. Massive engines, life support systems, power cores, all familiar to Jack, all part of the station's infrastructure. "Nexus 7 is dying," Valera said bluntly. "Our maintenance crews lack the expertise to prevent it. But you've worked on similar systems. Your repair logs from other stations are impressive." Jack studied the readouts, his engineer's mind already identifying problems, solutions. These systems needed overhaul months ago. Why wait until now? Politics. Valera's scales darkened. "The Merchants Guild controls most of our resources. They'd resist any major expenditure that doesn't directly profit them, even necessary ones. And what does this have to do with me? Work for me. Fix what needs fixing. In return, I'll clear your debts, release your ship, and pay you well enough to leave Nexus 7 whenever you choose." Jack laughed bitterly. "Just like that. There has to be a catch." "The catch, Mr. Morrison, is that if you fail, if these systems continue to degrade, Nexus 7 will become uninhabitable within 3 months. Thousands will die or be displaced, including you." She stepped closer. This near, he could see patterns in her scales, like circuits or writing. "I'm not asking you to do this for free or for me. Do it for yourself, for everyone trapped here by circumstance or poverty. Show us what humanity is capable of." Jack touched his grandfather's watch, feeling its steady tick against his palm. He thought of all the others like him on the station. The desperate, the stranded, the ones just trying to survive one more day. "I'll need full access to the station's systems," he said. "Complete autonomy in my work. And I choose my own crew." Valera's scales brightened. "Granted. All of it. Then we have a deal. Jack extended his hand, a human gesture he wasn't sure she'd understand. But Valera took it, her scaled fingers cool against his skin. Welcome aboard, Chief Engineer Morrison. As Jack left her office, his mind already racing with plans and calculations, he didn't notice the way Valera watched him go. Didn't see her scales shift to match the exact color of his eyes. Didn't realize that his arrival might have been less accidental than he believed. Sometimes, the story of how an engineer saved a space station became something more. Sometimes, it became the story of how humanity's ingenuity changed not just machines but hearts. Even alien ones. Jack's workshop was a mess of parts and potential. 3 weeks into his new role, he'd transformed an abandoned cargo bay into a makeshift repair facility. Salvaged equipment lined the walls, each piece carefully tested and cataloged. This was where the real work happened, far from the administrative sector's polished corridors. A holographic diagram of Nexus 7's power grid hovered above his workbench, sections flashing red. The station's energy distribution was worse than he'd initially thought. Someone had been siphoning power, rerouting it through unauthorized channels. The question was who, and why. Chief Morrison. The voice belonged to Trix, a young Meridian he'd hired as his assistant. Her crystalline form caught the workshop's lights, sending rainbow patterns across the walls. Administrator Valera requests your presence. Immediately, Jack found Valera in the Environmental Control Center, her scales a troubled gray. We lost pressure in Residential Block 7, she said without preamble. 3rd time this week. Sabotage, Jack replied, pulling up the system logs. These failures aren't random. Someone's testing our responses, learning our weaknesses. Valera's scales darkened further. The Merchants Guild. Maybe. But this feels different. More calculated. He showed her the power grid data. See these diversions. They're precise, professional, military grade. You suspect the Coalition. The galactic government had been pressuring Nexus 7 to accept direct oversight for months. It fits. Create enough problems. Blame the current administration's incompetence. Sweep in as saviors. Jack ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. But proving it could be deadly. Valera finished. She moved closer, her voice dropping. There's something else you should know. The Coalition has offered to buy my position. Quite generously. Jack stared at her. You're considering it? No. Her scales flushed with indignation. This station is my home. These people are my responsibility. But the offer came with a threat. Accept or face consequences. Why tell me this? Because I need someone I can trust. Someone with no political allegiances. Someone who sees problems and fixes them, no matter the cost. Her silver eyes held his. Someone human. The way she said it, like being human was an advantage, not a liability, stirred something in Jack. He'd spent his life being underestimated by alien societies, but here was one who saw humanity's adaptability as a strength. I found something else, he said, pulling up another diagram. The station's original designs. There's a secondary control system, independent of the main grid. Emergency protocols the Coalition doesn't know about. Valera's scales shifted to an interested blue. How long to get it operational? A week, maybe less. But I'll need access to restricted areas. And we'll have to work quietly. If the Coalition realizes what we're doing. They won't, she assured him. I'll handle the clearances. You focus on the technical side. As they planned, Jack noticed things about Valera he hadn't before. The way her scales rippled with suppressed emotion. The subtle signs of exhaustion in her posture. She carried the station's burdens alone, and it was wearing on her. Why do you really stay? He asked suddenly. You could go anywhere, do anything. Why fight for this place? Valera was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice held an edge of vulnerability he'd never heard before. Because everyone here is running from something, looking for something, or trying to build something. Just like me. We're all strays, in our way. Even you. Jack thought of his own journey. The failed contracts, the burned bridges, the endless search for somewhere to belong. Maybe that's what Nexus 7 really was. Not just a station, but a sanctuary for lost souls. We'll stop them, he promised. Whatever it takes. Valera's scales shimmered with what might have been hope. Together. Together. Neither of them saw cracks lurking in the shadows, recording every word. Neither knew their conversation was already being transmitted to Coalition headquarters. Neither realized that their partnership had just made them both targets. But in the days to come, when alarms would blare and lives would hang in the balance, they would discover that the strongest bonds are forged in crisis, and that sometimes the most powerful force in the galaxy isn't technology or politics, but the simple human capacity to care. The explosion rocked Nexus 7's lower levels at precisely 300 station time. Jack was already awake, running diagnostics on the backup systems, when the alarms began screaming. His workshop's displays lit up with damage reports. Hull breaches, failing life support, power fluctuations across multiple sectors. Right on schedule, he muttered, activating the emergency protocols he'd prepared. The secondary control system hummed to life, routing power to critical systems. His comm crackled. Morrison. Valera's voice was tight with urgency. They're making their move. Coalition forces are attempting to dock in multiple bays. Attempting. A grim smile crossed Jack's face as he watched his modifications take effect. Let's see how they like trying to dock with randomly cycling shield frequencies. But the Coalition had planned well. As Jack monitored the station's defenses, new alerts flashed across his screens. Internal security barriers failing, armed groups moving through the corridors, and worst of all, massive power drains indicating sabotage from within. Administrator. Jack switched channels. We've got internal help. Someone's disabling the security systems from inside. The response wasn't from Valera. Very observant, human. Crax's gravelly voice filled the workshop. Unfortunately, that knowledge won't help you now. Movement caught Jack's eye. Several armed figures emerged from the shadows, weapons trained on him. Their armor bore Coalition insignias. Step away from the controls, Crax ordered, stepping into view. Slowly. Jack raised his hands, mind racing. You really think the Coalition will let you keep running your extortion rackets after they take over? Better than letting some alien administrator play at democracy. Crax's mandibles clicked in amusement. Besides, they'd made a very convincing offer. I'm sure they did. Jack's eyes darted to his workbench, where a small remote lay partially hidden under some tools, just like they convinced you to spy on Valera, to report our plans. You humans think you're so clever. Crax moved closer, always trying to outsmart everyone else. But sometimes, brute force wins. Maybe, Jack agreed. But there's something you should know about humans. Oh, we're really good at planning ahead. Jack dove for the workbench. Weapons fired, but he was already rolling, remote in hand. One press of a button, and the workshop plunged into darkness. Emergency shutters slammed down over the doors. In the chaos that followed, Jack's modifications proved their worth. The armed intruders' targeting systems, calibrated for standard station lighting, were useless in the infrared spectrum he'd switched to. Their communication frequencies, monitored for weeks, were now jammed. But Crax was stronger, more experienced in close combat. His armored fist caught Jack's jaw, sending him sprawling. The remote skittered away across the floor. Enough games. Crax roared. I'll finish this myself. No, came a familiar melodic voice. You won't. Valera emerged from a hidden maintenance shaft, her scales glowing with bioluminescence. In her hands, she held what looked like a modified pulse rifle. Administrator, Crax sneered. Come to die with your pet human. Actually, she said, I came to demonstrate another human trait he taught me. Which is, always have a backup plan. The pulse rifle fired, but not at cracks. Instead, it hit a panel Jack had installed weeks ago. Suddenly, localized gravity reversed. The armed intruders, unprepared, were slammed into the ceiling. Only Jack and Valera, wearing gravity anchors disguised as maintenance badges, remained grounded. The station, Cracks gasped, struggling against the inverted gravity. "You'll destroy it." "Wrong again," Jack said, retrieving the remote. "We're saving it. But first, we're going to have a long talk about your coalition friends." Over the next hour, as security teams loyal to Valera secured the station, Jack learned the full scope of the coalition's plan. They had orchestrated the entire crisis, from the power failures to the nebula that had originally stranded him. They wanted chaos, Valera explained later, as they watched coalition ships retreat from the station. An excuse to intervene. "They never expected us to work together." "Their mistake," Jack said. "Thinking species can't cooperate, can't trust each other." Valera's scales shifted to match the workshop's lighting. "Is that why you trusted me? Despite everything you'd heard?" "I trusted you because you saw me as more than just another stranded human. You saw what I could do, not what I couldn't. And you showed me that sometimes the best solutions come from unexpected places." She touched his arm, her scales warming. "Or people." As they stood together, watching the nebula's swirling colors, Jack realized something had changed. Not just in the station's power systems or security protocols, but in the way different species looked at each other. Humans and aliens working together had saved Nexus 7. Perhaps they could do even more. But for now, there were repairs to make, systems to restore, and a station full of people, learning that the strongest power wasn't in weapons or politics, but in unity. "Systems at 40% capacity and falling," Jack's voice echoed through the control room. "We've got maybe 2 hours before life support fails in the residential sectors." The aftermath of the Coalition's attack had left Nexus 7 in crisis. Power cores were damaged, environmental systems strained, and thousands of lives hung in the balance. But this time, they weren't facing sabotage. They were fighting physics itself. "The nebula's radiation is intensifying," Valera reported, her scales a concerned purple. "It's interfering with our shield harmonics." Jack studied the readings, his mind racing through possibilities. The same nebula that had once trapped him here was now threatening everyone on board. But something about the energy pattern looked familiar. "Show me the original specs for your shield generators," he said suddenly. Valera brought up the blueprints. Standard galactic design. "Why?" "That's the problem. They're designed to reflect energy, not absorb it." Jack's fingers flew over the controls. "But what if we could use the nebula's radiation instead of fighting it?" "Impossible," one of the alien engineers protested. "The energy density would overwhelm our systems. Not if we modify the shield matrix." Jack pulled up his own designs. Humans learned this lesson centuries ago. Sometimes the best defense isn't a wall, it's a lightning rod. Understanding dawned in Valera's silver eyes. "You want to channel the nebula's energy into our power grid." "Exactly. The radiation's already in a similar frequency range to our power cores. With some recalibration, we could power the entire station," Valera finished. "But the risk is less than certain death." Jack met her gaze. "I can make it work, but I'll need help." What followed was a desperate race against time. Jack led a team of engineers, human and alien alike, in modifying the station's shield generators. They worked through exhaustion, past fear, driven by the knowledge that failure meant catastrophe. "Conversion matrix online," Jack announced. Hours later, starting power transfer in 3, 2, 1. The station hummed as nebula energy began flowing through the modified shields. Warning lights flashed across control panels. The deck plates vibrated beneath their feet. "Power levels rising," Valera reported. 50%, 60, 70. A conduit exploded nearby, showering sparks. Jack rushed to compensate, rerouting power through backup systems he'd installed weeks ago. Hull stress increasing, someone shouted. We're approaching structural limits. Hold it together, Jack muttered, both to the station and himself. His fingers danced across controls, making microscopic adjustments. This was what humans did best: adapting, improvising, refusing to accept failure. The moment seemed to stretch forever. Then suddenly, the vibrations stabilized. The warning lights dimmed. Power levels at 95%, Valdera announced, her scales shimmering with relief. All systems normalizing. We did it. The control room erupted in cheers. Species that had barely tolerated each other weeks ago now embraced, united in triumph. But Jack wasn't celebrating yet. We're not done, he said, already moving to a different console. The nebula's radiation patterns are changing. We need to fine-tune the convergent matrix, establish proper containment protocols. Valera touched his shoulder. Jack, stop for a moment. Look. He followed her gesture to the observation window. The nebula's purple swirls now pulsed in rhythm with the station's power grid, creating a stunning light show. But more beautiful was the sight of Nexus 7's lights coming back on, sector by sector, each one representing thousands of lives saved. Human ingenuity, Valera said softly. You didn't just fix our power problems. You turned a threat into a resource. We did it together, Jack corrected. Human innovation, alien technology. That's what makes this station special. As they watched the nebula's dance, neither mentioned how close they'd come to disaster. Neither spoke of the challenges still ahead. For now, it was enough to know that when faced with impossible odds, different species could work together to achieve the extraordinary. But in the depths of Nexus 7, past the celebrating crowds and restored systems, something was stirring. The Coalition's defeat had not gone unnoticed, and darker forces were taking interest in this unique partnership between human and alien. Forces that saw cooperation as a threat to their power. The station's troubles weren't over. They were about to evolve. The summons came 3 days after the nebula incident. Jack found Admiral Cross waiting in Valdera's office, a towering Arcturian whose crystalline carapace bore the highest Coalition military honors. Impressive work, Mr. Morrison, Cross said, mandibles clicking. Converting a nebula into a power source. The Coalition's Science Division is very interested in your modifications. The designs belong to Nexus 7, Jack replied carefully. Administrator Valera has final say on their use. Administrator Valera has been relieved of her position. Cross gestured, and armored troops entered. By order of the Galactic Council, Nexus 7 is now under Coalition protection. Valera burst in, her scales flashing angry red. You have no authority here. The Council voted an hour ago. Cross interrupted. Your recent innovations have been classified as potential weapons technology. The station requires proper oversight. Jack's mind raced. Something wasn't right. The Council couldn't have voted. Their nearest quorum was light years away. Unless you knew, he realized. You planned for us to solve the nebula crisis, waited for us to prove it could be done. Cross's mandibles twitched in what might have been a smile. Humans, so quick to see patterns. Yes, we suspected Administrator Valdera would turn to you for help. Your species' knack for unorthodox solutions is well documented. And now you want the technology for yourself. Valdera's scales had gone death black. To weaponize it, the Coalition maintains peace through strength, Cross declared. Mr. Morrison, you'll be well compensated for your cooperation, a position in our research division, unlimited resources. And if I refuse, then we'll extract the information by other means. Cross's troops raised their weapons, starting with your alien friend. Jack caught Valera's eye. In that split second, an entire conversation passed between them. Trust, built over months of crisis and cooperation, crystallized into understanding. You want to see human ingenuity. Jack's hand moved to his pocket, where his grandfather's watch ticked steadily. Watch closely. He pressed the watch's crown, a signal to activate the virus he coded into Nexus 7's new power grid. Throughout the station, lights flickered, security doors slammed shut, and in the nebula outside, energy patterns began to shift. "What are you doing?" Cross demanded as alarms blared. "Teaching you about human nature," Jack said. "We don't like bullies, and we plan for everything." Valdera moved with liquid grace, disarming the nearest guard while Jack dove for cover. The station's artificial gravity fluctuated, throwing the coalition troops off balance. "The nebula converter," Cross shouted. "Shut it down." "Can't," Jack called back. "Not without my personal codes, and good luck finding them in time." Through the observation window, the nebula's purple swirls had become a violent storm. Energy tendrils lashed at coalition ships attempting to dock. "You'll destroy the station," Cross roared. "No." Valdera stood proud, her scales rippling with deadly purpose. "We're saving it. Again. But this time, we're making sure no one can abuse its power." The next few minutes were chaos. Coalition troops found their weapons useless, their communications jammed by frequencies Jack had embedded in the station's new power grid. Meanwhile, security teams loyal to Valdera emerged from hidden passages, armed with weapons powered by nebula energy, immune to coalition countermeasures. When it was over, Admiral Cross and his forces found themselves in Nexus 7's holding cells, facing charges of attempted military coup. "The Council will hear of this," Cross threatened. "They already have." Valdera activated a holoscreen, showing transmissions of the entire confrontation broadcasting across coalition space. Another human idea: always keep evidence. Later, as they watched coalition ships retreat under escort, Jack felt Valdera's presence beside him. "How long had you planned for this?" she asked. "Since I realized the coalition would never let us keep this technology." He smiled grimly. "Humans learn the hard way what happens when powerful forces get their hands on new weapons." Valdera's scales shifted thoughtfully. "You could have taken their offer. Why didn't you?" Jack looked at her, at the station they'd saved together, at the nebula that had changed from prison to protector. "Because some things are worth more than power," he said simply. "Trust, friendship, the right to build something better." In the artificial twilight of Nexus 7, human and alien stood together, guardians of a future neither of them had imagined possible. But the greatest challenges and revelations still lay ahead. The message that changed everything arrived 6 months after the coalition's defeat. Jack was calibrating power relays when Valdera found him, her scales an unprecedented shade of silver white. "They're coming," she said without preamble. "All of them." The holographic display showed what had Valdera rattled: ships, hundreds of them, representing every major species in the galaxy. Not military vessels, but civilian craft, freighters, transports, research vessels. "They want to learn," Valdera explained. "Our success with the nebula energy, the way different species work together here. We've become a symbol." "Of what?" "Hope." She activated another display, showing messages from across the galaxy. "Every ship carries people seeking asylum, knowledge, opportunity. They believe Nexus 7 represents a new way forward." The implications staggered Jack. What had started as survival had become revolution, a challenge to centuries of isolation and mistrust between species. "We can't support them all," he said practically. "The station's resources are more than enough with your nebula converter." Valdera's scales rippled with excitement. "But that's not why I'm here. The Galactic Council has made an offer." "Another trap?" "No. They want to establish an interspecies engineering academy here on Nexus 7, with you as its director." Jack stared at her. "Me? I'm just a mechanic. You're the human who proved different species could do more than coexist. They could innovate together." Her voice softened. "And you're the man I love." The admission hung between them, unexpected yet somehow inevitable. Jack reached out, touching her scales gently. When did you know? When you refused to weaponize our technology. When you chose protection over power. Her scales flushed warm under his touch. When did you know? When you trusted a stranded human to save your station. When you saw possibility instead of limitations. The moment was interrupted by urgent calls from the docking control. The first wave of ships was arriving, carrying hopes and dreams, and challenges they'd never imagined facing. Over the next weeks, Nexus 7 transformed. Empty sectors filled with new life. The station hummed with dozens of languages, hundreds of ideas. Jack's workshop became the nucleus of the academy, where species shared technologies and techniques once jealously guarded. But the greatest change was in perception. Humans, once seen as primitive newcomers to galactic society, became sought-after partners in innovation. Their adaptability, creativity, and determination proved invaluable in solving problems that had stumped other species for centuries. "You've started something remarkable," Valeria told Jack one evening, as they watched students from 20 different worlds collaborate on a new energy matrix. "We started it," he corrected. "All of us. Every species that chose cooperation over conflict. And us." Her scales shimmered questioningly. "What did we start?" Jack smiled, taking her hand. Their fingers intertwined. Human warmth and alien grace in perfect harmony. "Something even the nebula couldn't predict," he said. "A future where differences don't divide us. Where being human or alien matters less than being together." Outside their window, the nebula continued its eternal dance, no longer a barrier but a beacon. Its energy powered not just the station, but the dreams of thousands who had come seeking something more than survival. And at the heart of it all, a human engineer and an alien administrator had proved that the greatest power in the universe wasn't in weapons or politics or even technology. It was in the choice to trust, to love, to build something new. Together, they had written a new chapter in galactic history. But more than that, they had shown that humanity's greatest gift to the universe wasn't ingenuity or determination. It was the capacity to imagine a better way forward. And that was just the beginning.